Alright, so Rossi has been out for a few hours, days. I've been barely getting sleep, so I have no idea how long she's been out for. Today, I have a complete guide for Rossi for you, so you can understand how she works, how to play her, team requirements, calculations for her weapon as well, and talk a little bit about gear options for your Rossi, depending on how much ultimate gain efficiency you need. If you watch my previous video, most of the information I talked about there is pretty much correct. I highly recommend to, at the very least, watch the team building part of this video because of some new updates regarding Rossi team building compared to my previous video, and also, of course, the weapon calculation. You can just jump in the timestamps, feel free to watch the whole video if you want to. Another quick note is that if this video is too old and you're just watching this for the very first time, I highly recommend to check the link down in the description, because if something new gets discovered, some new tech that changes how Rossi is going to be played, then I'm definitely going to be updating the guide in the description. Let's start by talking about what Rossi is and how she works. So Rossi is technically a hybrid DPS, and she's a really interesting unit with a really interesting kit. For example, her combat talent, the very first one, is going to apply a mark on enemies that deals a bleed effect. The enemies take physical damage, and most importantly, it also applies physical and hit damage taken on them. Why this is good? This is because you can get damage bonus on your character. Damage taken is another multiplier. So once you have two of these multipliers together, you're just multiplying one with the other, which means more damage for you. And then on top of this, we also have the second talent, that against enemies under the mark, which is pretty much the first talent, Rossi's critical hits are going to trigger another instance of hit damage on enemies that is increased even further if the enemy is under combustion. Now, on my previous video, I was under the assumption that combustion was going to be really good and make a huge difference on Rossi's damage. 50% damage increase on this talent, it is good, however, it's definitely not necessary for Rossi's damage. So treat combustion as a good extra damage, not a requirement for your Rossi's rotation. Okay? For the rest of the kit, basic attacks, they are pretty long in terms of animations, and they only deal physical damage. I personally don't recommend you to field Rossi, not because of the long animation, especially because there is an animation cancel that you can do on Rossi in order to speed up her basic attack sequence. It's mostly because her battle skill and combo skill animations, they are really long, and if you are fielding Rossi, this means that whenever you're using these skills, you are not going to do any basic attacks on enemies. For her battle skill, it's going to apply lift to enemies, which is a physical status, which means more vulnerable stacks, but most importantly, if the enemy is already vulnerable before you apply this lift, Rossi is going to do a follow-up attack. And this follow-up attack is really important because this is the one that applies the combat talent 1 on enemies, the mark that I mentioned before, that applies the bleed, physical, and hit damage taken as well, and it also generates another 10 ultimate energy for her. So having the follow-up attack is really important, not only because of the combat talent itself, but because of the ultimate energy gain. The combo skill is going to apply up to 2 vulnerable stacks. The skill is pretty long and has a second part. If you do the second hit with a perfect timing, you get 2 vulnerable stacks. You miss the timing, you get only 1 vulnerable stack. But most importantly, it has a critical rate and critical damage boost after using the combo skill. This is really important for you, as we don't have a lot of sources for critical damage. And finally, we have the ultimate, which is a massive burst. I was not expecting this kind of numbers. This is a really longer ultimate, with the very first part dealing only 600% of damage, and the final 2 hits, they are going to deal 1000 damage multiplier. So in total, 1600 damage multiplier, but this stab part right here, this is a total of 25 hits. 25 plus 2, 27 hits. Imagine if you trigger 27 times this combat talent in a single ultimate. It's a lot of damage, especially because the ultimate itself also includes another critical damage boost. This is a lot of damage, and you can expect, including the hits from the second combat talent, to totalize around 2200 damage multiplier just by using your ultimate. This is pretty much the reason why Rossi's hit damage is so high. So in terms of gameplay, Rossi gameplay is really simple. You just want the enemy to have vulnerable, then you use the battle skill, you apply the mark on the enemy as fast as you can to ensure that all of your damage is going to benefit from the damage taken. The enemy is going to have the damage over time. Rossi is going to get access to the extra effect from the second talent as well. So you want this battle skill with the follow-up as fast as you can. After this, you also want to use the combo skill as soon as it's available, because this is going to ensure that you're going to have access to all the crit buffs available on this combo skill. And once you have the ultimate, the enemy is under stagger or something, once you're ready to unleash everything, make sure that the Rossi's combo skill buff is active, and then you apply all the other buffs available depending on your teammates and other stuff, and then just use the ultimate for massive damage on the enemy. Now let's talk about team building, because there are some strict requirements for all of this to work. For example, I mentioned the battle skill. The enemy needs to have vulnerable already. If you don't have any other source of vulnerable, this means that you need to use Rossi's skill 2 times, which means 200 skill points, but the very first one is not going to generate extra ultimate energy for you. This slows down your rotation. There are only 2 units in the game that can apply vulnerable stacks on the enemy without using an ultimate or skill points, and these are Ember and Gilberto. We also have the combo skill, and the combo skill requires not only vulnerable on the enemy, it also requires the enemy to be under Arc's infliction, not Arc's reaction. Okay, we're not talking about combustion, corrosion, electrification, or solidification. We are talking about the Arc's infliction itself on the enemy. So the problem is that Rossi by herself has only one source of Arc's infliction, which is the ultimate. We are not going to be using the ultimate for Arc's infliction. We want to maximize the damage on our ultimate. And on top of this, Rossi is really good at applying vulnerable stacks on the enemy. Combo skill applies 2, battle skill applies 1. So in total, it's really easy for you to go all the way to the maximum vulnerable stacks. The problem is that Rossi has no way to consume these vulnerable stacks. And by logic, we want someone that can make use of these vulnerable stacks. Well, Gilberta, as I mentioned before, she can make use and increase the Arc's ability she applies to enemy. But outside of this, the only 3 characters that can consume vulnerable right now in the game are Endmin, Dapan, and Pogranicznik. Endmin and Dapan, they are going to consume to deal Crush, and Pogranicznik is going to consume to apply Breach. Breach is not going to deal as much damage as Crutch, but increases the physical damage of your team. So following this logic, we have a team that needs to consist of Rossi herself, a character that can apply Arc's infliction, a character that can consume vulnerable stacks, and a flex slot that could be someone that helps Rossi with the very first vulnerable application. In this case, we're talking about Gilberta and Ember, or you can just use another support and accept the fact that you're going to spend more SP to get the first vulnerable stack. So let's assume that you go for a team like this. There is a massive issue here on this team. We're talking about Rossi, a character that deals hybrid damage, so let's assume that is 50-50, alright? So half of her damage is physical, half of her damage is hit. I have a character dealing full Arc damage, a character dealing pure physical damage, and we have Gilberta, a character that is going to make use of the vulnerable stacks to increase the Arc's damage on the team. How many characters is Gilberta actually increasing the damage right here? 1.5 characters. The other 1.5 character is actually not getting any benefit from Gilberta. We don't have anyone that is going to increase the enemy damage potential. On top of this, we don't have vanguards here. We need to spend skill points on Endmin to also consume the vulnerable stacks. So this is one of the main issues with Rossi teams, and why I said and I stand by my opinion that Rossi is weird. I'm not saying she's weak, but she's in a weird spot because of the options that are available for Rossi teams. Because there's simply no character that can increase both physical and Arc damage at the same time. And I know exactly what you're going to say. We have Ardelia. Why are you forgetting about Ardelia? The reason why I'm not talking about Ardelia is simply because she makes the team requirements even more strict. By using Ardelia right here, you need a vulnerable consumption slot. Why? Because Ardelia combo skill, which is the main reason why we're even using Ardelia, it requires you to have an enemy without Arc's infliction and without vulnerable stacks. And Rossi is always going to be applying vulnerable stacks to enemies. We need someone that can remove them, otherwise Ardelia is not going to be able to use her combo skill. And then on top of this, you also need to spend another 100 SP on your Ardelia just to get the physical and Arc's ability effect. And don't forget one thing, Ardelia cannot apply Arc's infliction on enemies. She's only going to apply corrosion. This also means that you need to spend another 100 on your Gilberta to apply Arc's infliction on enemies. So by the end, you can see how much skill points we are consuming right here, and we have no way to generate these skill points. That is going to repeat over and over because you always need all of these things to happen. You want arts and physical susceptibility, you want the arts infliction, you want the buff on Rossi to be refreshed, and you want to consume all the stacks. It's always going to flow in that order. It works, that's for sure, but it's not going to feel great to play. There's going to be a lot of downtime while you're waiting for your SP to regenerate and you don't have a Vanguard on the team. Some people mentioned this on my previous video, that you don't need to consume vulnerable stacks at all, and that is actually correct. Vulnerable stacks are a great damage addition, but if we are hurting all of our damage, all of our rotation, because we don't have supports that can increase both damages at the same time, then why are we even consuming vulnerable stacks? Gilberta is a character that can increase arts damage. Why not just focus on the arts damage potential of this team? Why not simply run something like this? This works simply because playing around all Rossi's requirements right now on her team composition is way too difficult for not worth gains. This is the problem that I was talking about in my previous video. We keep using Gilberta because Gilberta can easily help Rossi to trigger her vulnerable stacks, trigger her combo skill and everything right at the beginning. But we are not consuming the vulnerable stacks here, so this means that we don't need to wait for Gilberta to apply her lift again and start another rotation on Rossi. So instead of waiting 20 seconds, which is Gilberta combo skill cooldown, we only need to wait for Arts Infliction, and we can get Arts Infliction on any of these other 3 units. So this already makes the gameplay flow much better, because instead of having a 15-second cooldown combo that is going to play around a 20-second rotation right here, we can play around the 50-second whenever we want, just by applying our Arts Infliction on the enemy. And then since Perlica and Gilberta, they are providing arts-related buffs, Electrification is going to increase the arts damage the enemy take, Gilberta is providing arts disability, Tuntan can also provide arts disability as well, and on top of this, we also have the signature weapon that increases the arts damage taken at the same time. So all of these units, they are going to provide somewhat a decent amount of damage, with all the basic attacks they are going to do in the background, and Rossi can still deal damage by using her ultimate. So doing this is actually one of the strongest way for you to play Rossi right now. Even if you don't have Tantan and you want to use something else, you can simply go for Akekuri, for example. Akekuri is a Vanguard, which means you're going to get some extra SP from her, and most importantly, Akekuri is also going to provide Rossi with Link, which is going to enhance her ultimate for even more damage. Anyway, point is, you can mix and match, and by removing the vulnerable consumption slot, it opens up so many possibilities for you. You can go back to Wolfguard, for example, but use another 2 units that are going to increase the arts damage instead of having a unit that is going to consume the vulnerable stacks. If you really want to play around vulnerable consumption in a more hybrid setup, then this is the blueprint you need to keep in mind. A character with arts infliction, a character that is going to consume the vulnerable stacks, and a character that can either be a support or help Rossi with applying vulnerable stacks on the enemy. Okay, so for example, you could go for Wolfguard, Endming, and Ember right here if you don't have Gilberta, for example. You can go for Perlica, Endming, and I don't know. You got the idea already. This is the blueprint, this is the idea of a hybrid team, all right? These are the 2 ways you can build your team for Rossi. And this was a really long yap about teams. I hope it could make sense for you and you can understand a little bit of the issues and everything, and have an idea of how you can approach your team building for Rossi. I don't know, I'm mostly thinking about keeping videos like this, team building blueprint and information like this. Let me know what you think about in the comments as well, because instead of making a team video for every single team possibility, I much rather make a more generic blueprint so you have an idea of what you can do for your team. Anyway, let's talk about weapons now, because Rossi's signature weapon is a really interesting one. It provides similar effects to Glorious Memory, by the way. We have agility, we have critical rate, we have the attack as well. Rossi's signature is going to provide physical and hit damage boost. A potential 0 with the essence is going to be a total of 40% physical and hit damage for your Rossi. The difference is the Glorious Memory is only providing damage for your ultimate. which is exactly what we're trying to play around. So at the end, Rossi's signature is good for her, and only her. The physical character is not going to make use of the hit damage. The hit character is also not going to make use of the physical damage. Glorious Memory is a really good weapon. The attack that it provides is lower than her signature weapon. Rossi can apply vulnerable stacks pretty easily, so this means that you can easily stack this weapon for a lot of extra damage on her ultimate. Okay, so me personally, I recommend you to stick to Glorious Memory if you are a free-to-play player. If you don't have Glorious Memory or you're not planning to get it as well, then your best option as a free-to-play player is going to use Sundering Steel. This means a lot of attack for your Rossi. That is going to work really well for both the physical and the hit damage as well. And for gears, the recommendation that I did for my previous video, it's pretty much the same right here. The most general option is this set that you're looking on your screen right now. This is going to ensure that we got a lot of crit rate for Rossi. This gives a little bit of ultimate gain efficiency as well, and we use the Redeemer Gloves instead of the MI Security Gloves, since Redeemer Gloves gives more agility than MI Security. But you can always change this depending on how much ultimate gain efficiency your build needs, as I said on my previous video. For example, instead of Redeemer Gloves, you can just use Eternal's Tyrannite Gloves for some extra ultimate gain efficiency as well. But you're losing some stats right here. So in the same way, you can also remove some crit rate, although I don't recommend it, but if you really need the extra ultimate gain, you can also just use the MI Security Gloves to ensure that you're going to have access to the MI Security effect, and then you use one Redeemer Seal as your kit. There's one option that I forgot to mention, which is why I'm recording this extra bit. Technically, this gives you higher attack than any other combination, simply because Lynx's Lab gives you main attribute percentage, which is really strong. However, you are losing critical rate, and this means that you have the chance to miss crit hits on your ultimate, and every single time you miss crit hits on your ultimate, you are missing the 260 crit damage that you can get on it. And on top of this, it also means that you're losing the damage of Rossi's second combat talent. So me personally, I would stick to double crit rate right here and just use Redeemer's Gloves. It makes everything much more consistent. There is another option you can use in case you simply don't need any ultimate gain efficiency at all. You can use the Redeemer Plates. This is because this armor gives more agility than MI Security, and this one gives extra damage to your base attack, which is technically more useful than ultimate gain if you're not making use of the ultimate gain. I personally don't think you should do this, especially because it's a minimal DPS gain, and this is a body piece that you're probably not going to be using on anyone else. So don't do this one. This is just one of the options in case you really need zero ultimate gain efficiency. Just stick to the general recommendation, which is going to work for most scenarios, most rotations as well, which is the MI Security body. This is the go-to set option, and then you just adjust depending on your rotation and other stuff. Because this body piece with Gilberto can give up to 23% ultimate gain efficiency. Going above this ultimate gain efficiency, it's likely that you're going to sacrifice a lot of damage just to get your ultimate a little bit earlier, which is not recommended at all. Alright, and that should be everything about Rossi. If there's still anything that you want to know about Rossi, feel free to leave a comment down below or join my Discord server. Once again, if this video is too old, depending on when you're watching, just check the link down in the description for more updated information, if there's any updated information. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day, good night, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Peace, peace.